Find the derivative of f of x equals 1 over 1 minus 3x to the fourth times 1 minus 4x to the third. So f of x here is a constant over a product of two functions, 1 minus 3x to the fourth times 1 minus 4x to the third. Since the numerator is a constant, we're not going to want to make use of the quotient rule here. We're going to want to rewrite this by bringing those to the numerator as negative exponents. So we'll have 1 minus 3x to the negative 4 times 1 minus 4x to the negative 3. And make use of just the product rule. So the derivative, f prime of x, will be the derivative of the first. We start with the power. We'll bring the power down, minus 4. Leave the inside alone, 1 minus 3x. Subtract 1 from the power, it'll give us a negative 5. Times the derivative of the inside to complete the chain rule, so times a negative 3. Derivative of the first times the second left alone plus the first left alone times the derivative of the second, which is a power rule. We'll bring down the power negative 3. We'll leave the inside alone. We'll subtract 1 from the power. Negative 3 minus 1 more is negative 4. And then multiply by the derivative of the inside to complete the chain rule. In our next step, we're going to combine together the constants. This first term, we have a negative 4 and negative 3. Everything there is multiplying each other. So we can put the negative 4 and negative 3 together. That's a positive 12. And we have 1 minus 3x to the negative 5, and a 1 minus 4x to the negative 3. And in the second term, we have a negative 3 and a negative 4. We'll put those together. That'll be a positive 12. And we have a 1 minus 3x to the negative 4, and a 1 minus 4x also to the negative 4. And now we can start factoring this. F prime of x will be, the first thing we can factor is the constants. Now we have a 12 in front of each of them, so a 12 can factor out. So we'll have 12 times, well, that'll leave a 1 in front of this expression and a 1 in front of the other expression. So we have factored the constant out. The next thing to factor out are powers of the expressions. Now we have a 1 minus 3x raised to powers in each term, and we have a 1 minus 4x raised to powers in each term. We'll be able to factor those out. Let's start with factoring out a 1 minus 3x to a power. Now if we look inside, the first term we have a power of negative 5, and the second term we have a power of negative 4. We can factor out the lower of the two, and that's a negative 5. That's lower than a negative 4. It's more negative. So it's a negative 5 power we're going to be able to factor. Now when you factor, you're dividing. Dividing means subtracting, so we're going to be subtracting a negative 5, which is equivalent to adding a 5 to the exponents. Now with the first one, it's to the negative 5. If you add 5 to that, it'll be to the 0, and that whole thing will be factored out. To this one, if you add 5 to this, negative 4 plus 5 will become a 1. And there's what we're going to have left over. So we will have a 1 minus 4x to the negative 3 for the first term. We completely removed the 1 minus 3x to the negative 5. In the second term, we're going to have 1 minus 3x to the negative 4 minus a negative 5, or added to 5, which is to the 1 power. And then we have a 1 minus 4x to the negative 4. We haven't done anything with that just yet. Now in the next step, we're going to be able to factor out a power of 1 minus 4x. And we can factor out the lowest power found in the terms. Now if you look in the terms, we have a negative 3 power in the first term and a negative 4 power in the second term. The lower is the negative 4. That's more negative. again, we're subtracting a negative 4 because we're dividing it out. We're subtracting a negative 4, which is equivalent to adding a 4. So we're going to add a 4 to this one, which is going to be a positive 1 power. So that means this is just going to become a 1. And if we add a 4 to this other one, it's just going to make it be a 0, and that whole term is going to become a 1. Anything raised to 0 is a 1, so that whole term will drop out, and there's what will be left over. It looks like we're going to have a 1 minus 4x plus a 1 minus 3x. So f prime of x now equals, we have a 12, we have a 1 minus 3x to the negative 5, we have a 1 minus 4x to the negative 4, and in the brackets we can remove the parentheses, so we'll have a 1 minus 4x plus a 1 minus 3x. We can combine like terms together there, so 12 times 1 minus 3x to the negative 5 times 1 minus 4x to the negative 4. And inside the square brackets, adding like terms, 1 plus 1 is a 2, and then minus 4x and minus 3x is a negative 7x. The last thing we can do with this, those negative exponents can move to the denominator to become positive exponents, and that's how the final derivative form will look. So we will have remaining in the numerator a 12, that's not going to move, and a 2 minus 7x, that's not going to move. Neither of those were to a negative exponent. And then the entire thing over, and we're going to move the 1 minus 3x to the denominator, and it will now be to the positive 5th power, and a 1 minus 4x to the denominator, and it will now be to a positive 4th power in the denominator. There's our derivative f prime of x.